Millionaire CEO heard his maid's daughter crying over a broken toy. His action shocked the household. The penthouse sat high above Manhattan, all glass and silence, clean lines, cold marble, every corner designed with precision. It was the kind of place that felt more like a showroom than a home. Stephen Langston lived alone in it. At 34, he was already a household name in the business world. Young, powerful, intimidatingly efficient. The kind of man who didn't waste time, didn't entertain distractions, and certainly didn't notice the quiet details of his own life. He worked long hours, spoke little, and expected perfection from everyone who stepped into his space, including the help. Kathy had been working in his home for almost a year, 3 mornings a week. She was 28, blonde hair always tied back, clothes modest but neat. Her presence was gentle, efficient, invisible by design. Sometimes, when her babysitter canceled or the daycare closed, she brought her daughter along. Emmy was 3, curious, polite, and small enough to disappear into corners with her tiny toys. She never touched anything that wasn't hers, and Kathy made sure of it. Stephen rarely acknowledged either of them. He'd pass through the room with a coffee in hand, murmuring a brief "morning," if that. Then it was back to his office, where deals were made, numbers ruled, and emotions had no place. Kathy was polishing the windows. Emmy sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, playing with a small wooden doll. The paint was faded, the joints a little stiff, but she treated it like treasure. That morning felt like any other. Stephen stood in his office, scanning emails, untouched coffee cooling on the desk. The muffled hum of vacuuming came from the hall. Outside, Manhattan raced forward as always. Kathy polished windows in the living room. Emmy sat nearby on the carpet, legs crossed, cradling a small wooden doll. The paint was chipped, the limbs stiff, but she held it like it was treasure. Then came a sound that didn't belong. Not a crash, not a wail, just a small voice, shaky and full of something far deeper than a child should carry. "I'm sorry you're broken. I'll still love you." Stephen looked up. He stepped out of his office. Kathy was in the kitchen, wiping the counter. Emmy sat curled on the rug, shoulders hunched. The doll lay broken across her lap, one arm dangling. She wasn't crying, only sniffled quietly as she stroked its worn head. Stephen hesitated. He should have turned back. This wasn't his concern. But something stopped him. A memory rose, uninvited. A broken plastic fire truck held together with old tape. His mother's tired hands, her whispered apologies. That cold apartment where silence meant they couldn't ask for more. He took a step forward. Kathy looked up, startled. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure if she should intervene. Stephen crouched beside Emmy. She looked up at him, eyes glassy with tears, cheeks damp. He nodded toward the doll. "Is that your favorite?" he asked, voice low. Emmy nodded. Stephen reached out, slowly, and picked it up. The break was clean, but delicate. He turned it gently in his hands, as if it were made of something precious. He looked at her and offered a quiet smile, one that didn't belong in a boardroom. "Let's fix her together," he said. Emmy blinked. Then her mouth curled into a soft, shy smile. Behind them, Kathy stood frozen, one hand still holding a rag, her heart lodged somewhere in her throat. In that moment, something shifted. The penthouse, once all glass and silence, felt warmer, less like a fortress, more like a place someone might choose to stay. Stephen Langston, the man whose world revolved around numbers and results, found himself still kneeling beside a child with a broken toy and a voice soft enough to wake something long buried in him. And for the first time in years, he didn't think about profit margins or emails. He thought about being small, and what it felt like to be fixed. Stephen held the broken doll in his hands, turning it gently. One arm had come loose, and the torso had split along a hairline crack. The wood was worn but well loved. It was not a fancy toy. In fact, it looked handmade, imperfect, fragile. Most people would have handed it to someone else. called in a cleaner, tossed it aside. Instead, Stephen said, "Wait here." He stood up and walked quickly down the hallway to his office. From the back of a desk drawer, behind old blueprints and archived contracts, he pulled out a small, dented metal box. Inside, a tiny screwdriver set, sandpaper, glue, bits of string and tape, a toolkit from a life long before suits and boardrooms, a college dorm, shared apartments, nights spent fixing cheap furniture because buying new was not an option. Back in the living room, Emmy was still sitting patiently, hands folded on her lap. Stephen knelt beside her again and opened the box. "We'll try to fix her, okay?" he said. "Just like how I used to fix my toys when I was little, or tried to." Emmy nodded, eyes lighting up. From the kitchen doorway, Kathy stood silently, half hidden behind the wall. She had heard the entire exchange, but something in her told her not to interrupt. She clutched her cleaning cloth with both hands, as if it anchored her to the floor. Stephen worked carefully. He wiped the wooden doll clean with a soft cloth from his pocket, pausing to smooth away years of grime and dust. His movements were slow, deliberate, not rushed like his usual pace. He glued the crack, fitting the two halves together with surprising precision. Then, using a thin cotton ribbon from Emmy's toy kit, he tied a small brace around the middle to hold the doll's body while it dried. All the while, he spoke quietly to Emmy. "Where did she come from?" he asked. "She was Daddy's last gift," Emmy whispered. "Before he went to heaven." Stephen's hands paused for just a second, then resumed their work. He did not push further. When the doll was fixed and resting gently on the table to dry, Emmy opened a small plastic box of stickers. She rummaged through it and pulled out a faded heart-shaped one. It was pink, slightly crumpled at the edge. She held it up. "Can we put this on her back?" she asked. "So she knows she's still loved, even if she's broken." Stephen looked at her, completely still. For a moment, he could not speak. The words caught in his throat. Then, without a word, he nodded. He peeled the sticker carefully and pressed it to the doll's back. His fingers lingered there, as if sealing in something invisible. "I think she's perfect now," he said softly. "Maybe even stronger than before." Emmy smiled and crawled into his lap, wrapping her arms around him with no hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. Stephen," she said. "You're like a toy doctor." Stephen let out a quiet laugh. Not the polite kind he used in meetings, not the practiced chuckle at industry events. A real laugh, low, warm, unfamiliar. From the kitchen, Kathy watched in silence. Her eyes filled with tears before she realized it. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, still gripping the cleaning rag. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "What just happened?" The penthouse had always been a space of order and silence, but now, for the first time, there was a shift, small, almost imperceptible, but real. A thread of warmth in the cold glass and steel. Stephen Langston did not know exactly what had changed. He only knew that something had, and for once, he did not rush to define it. He simply stayed there, with the little girl in his lap, and a broken doll now whole again on the table beside them. The next morning, the city moved beneath a gray sky. It was the kind of day that hinted at snow, though none had fallen yet. Inside Stephen Langston's penthouse, everything remained in place, polished, pristine, and still. But something had changed, though none of them could quite name it yet. Kathy arrived at her usual time, holding Emmy's hand. The little girl was practically skipping, her fingers wrapped tightly around her mother's. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation, her steps light with excitement. Kathy, on the other hand, felt far from settled. She wore a white button-up shirt, clean, though frayed at the cuffs, and a pair of well-worn jeans. Her blonde hair was tied back as always, but loose strands framed her face, softening the tiredness in her features. The dark circles under her eyes hinted at another night, spent mending clothes for, extra cash, or staying up late to plan the week's meals. Her gaze was alert, always scanning, always cautious, as if bracing for things to go wrong. She had not stopped thinking about the day before, The way Stephen had sat down on the floor, the way he had spoken to Emmy, it had felt kind, human, but it also made her uneasy. This was not how things were supposed to be. Not in this place. Not with a man like him. As they stepped into the apartment, Kathy gave her daughter a soft reminder. "Stay in your corner, sweetie. Don't touch anything." Emmy nodded, obedient but beaming. Stephen appeared a few moments later, dressed casually for once. No suit, no tie, just a soft gray sweater and dark slacks. He spotted Emmy and offered her a small wave. Emmy grinned. Then, he did something Kathy was not prepared for. He walked over and knelt beside her daughter again. Kathy tensed. Without thinking, she stepped forward quickly, placing herself between them. "I'm sorry," she said quietly but firmly. "I told her to sit quietly. I will make sure she does not bother you." Stephen looked up, a bit surprised. Then a faint smile touched his lips, gentle, unforced. "She's not bothering me," he replied. "Actually, I think she helped me realize a few things yesterday." Kathy opened her mouth, but no words came. His tone wasn't dismissive. It wasn't professional. It was sincere. And that, more than anything, left her unsure of how to respond. She nodded once and returned to her cleaning, eyes downcast, mind racing. Since when did Stephen Langston speak like a person instead of a CEO? Later that morning, while Kathy was scrubbing the kitchen counter, Emmy ran in, whispering urgently, "Mommy, Mr. Stephen gave me a cookie. It's special. Look." Emmy held out a carefully wrapped treat. A round cookie, tied with a gold ribbon. Attached was a tiny note, written in neat but relaxed handwriting. "For the best toy doctor assistant in town." Kathy stared at it, then at her daughter's proud face. She took the note, held it in her hand, and looked across the room toward Stephen's study. He was back at his desk, reviewing something on his laptop, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But it had. He had written that note. He had remembered. Kathy swallowed hard. She did not speak. She just smiled faintly and handed the cookie back to Emmy, who skipped away, humming. By the time they were getting ready to leave, the wind had picked up outside, brushing softly against the massive windows. Kathy lifted Emmy into her arms, pulling her coat tighter around the child's shoulders. As she stepped into the elevator, she whispered into her daughter's ear, "You have to be careful, sweetheart. Don't let people think we're taking advantage." Emmy leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and replied, in that simple, disarming way only a child could, "We didn't ask for anything, Mommy. He gave it because he wanted to." Kathy froze. There was no argument to that. No grown-up logic to defend against it. She looked down at her daughter, kissed her forehead, and as the elevator doors closed, she felt something shift, not outside, but inside. A softness breaking through the shell she had so carefully built. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the reading room, falling in long stripes across the rug. The city murmured far below, but in Stephen Langston's penthouse, there was stillness. Stephen sat behind his desk, a half-finished report glowing on the screen before him, but his eyes were elsewhere. His gaze had landed on a piece of paper lying next to a stack of documents, left behind, unnoticed until now. It was a drawing, childlike, colorful, and filled with crooked lines and big smiles. 3 people sat around a dinner table, candles glowing, a roasted chicken in the middle, steam curling up into the air. At the center was a man with dark hair, smiling. On one side, a little girl with yellow pigtails. On the other, a woman with long blonde hair, her eyes drawn like soft half-moons. And underneath, in shaky letters, the words, "This is what happy looks like." Stephen stared at the paper for a long time. His fingers curled around it, holding it tighter than he meant to. It should have been nothing. Just a child's fantasy. A cute drawing. Something to smile at politely before placing in a drawer. But it was not nothing. Because when he looked at it, a flood of something old and buried rose in his chest. He remembered a different table, smaller, worn with time. A single flickering candle stuck in an empty wine bottle. His mother, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired but shining, placing a pan of canned soup on the table like it was a feast. She worked 2 jobs and still managed to smile at him like he was the reason the world kept turning. Stephen had not thought of her in this way in years, not since she passed. But now, looking at the soft, careful eyes in the drawing, he realized something. Kathy's eyes were just like hers. That quiet strength, that relentless warmth, even in exhaustion. That way of making others feel safe, without needing to speak much at all. He exhaled slowly, still holding the picture. The next morning, Stephen made a decision. He walked into his office, opened the bottom drawer of a cabinet rarely touched, and pulled out a notebook. The leather cover was worn smooth at the corners. Inside were pages filled with sketches, clippings, notes, interior design inspiration he had once collected with a friend in college, now long forgotten. He found a blank note card and wrote a short message. For someone with good taste and steady hands. He tucked the card inside and left the notebook on the coffee table in the living room, exactly where Kathy would see it while tidying. Then he left for his meetings. When Kathy found it later that morning, her breath caught. She picked it up carefully, turning it in her hands. The leather was soft, aged. It smelled faintly of paper and something older, like memory. She opened it. The sketches were thoughtful, detailed, annotated with ideas in a handwriting she recognized as Stephen's. And the note, simple but deliberate. Her heart thudded in her chest. She stood for a moment, frozen, notebook open in her hands. Then she slowly closed it and placed it back exactly where she found it. Not because she didn't want it, but because she was afraid to want it too much. Afraid that a small kindness could turn into something she would long for, and longing was dangerous. Kathy returned to her work, head down, silent. When she and Emmy left that afternoon, the air had grown crisp, the kind of cold that carried the promise of winter. They walked hand in hand down the hallway, coats wrapped tight around them. In the elevator, Emmy looked up at her mother, thoughtful. "Mommy," she asked, "do you think Mr. Stephen is lonely too?" Kathy didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter's innocent face, then toward the softly closing elevator doors. Finally, in a whisper, she said, "Maybe he is." Stephen had started asking Kathy to come in an extra day each week, Thursdays. He said he needed help reorganizing his home library, which, while neatly shelved, didn't actually require any real reorganization. But Kathy came anyway. Those Thursdays were different, not just because they saw each other more, but because, slowly, carefully, their words started to stretch beyond polite greetings. Stephen asked questions, not about cleaning, but about her, about the design school she never finished, about what colors she liked, about the chairs she used to sketch for fun back in college. Kathy, guarded at first, began answering. They laughed sometimes, not loudly, but genuinely. And once or twice, their eyes lingered a little longer than expected. It was nothing. But it was not nothing. Then came the dream. One night, Stephen saw them in his sleep, Emmy's giggles echoing off the walls, Kathy lighting candles at the table, and him, sitting between them, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. But in the dream, he turned away for just a second. When he looked back, the chairs were empty. The table was still warm, the food untouched, but they were gone, and the silence returned, loud, sharp, unforgiving. He woke up with a start, heart pounding. The darkness of his bedroom wrapped around him like a warning. It wasn't just a dream. It was a fear, raw, familiar. He had built his life with walls, calculated, measured, controlled. Letting someone in meant those walls might crack, and if they cracked, everything could collapse. What if caring meant losing again? The next morning, Stephen stayed in his room. When Kathy arrived with Emmy, the penthouse was quiet. There was no greeting, no casual remark, no smile, only a printed task list left on the kitchen counter by the housekeeper. Kathy read it, then folded it in half. There were no cookies for Emmy that day, no eye contact, no warmth. She felt the message without it needing to be spoken. By the end of the shift, she approached the housekeeper and handed her a neatly folded envelope addressed to Mr. Langston. Inside was a short note. "Please remove me from the Thursday schedule. I do not wish to be an inconvenience to Mr. Langston. Thank you for understanding." She did not wait for a reply. That night, Kathy sat at her small table, needle in hand, patching a rip in an old pair of jeans she planned to resell. The silence in her apartment was familiar, but it felt heavier now. She wasn't angry. She knew who Stephen was when she took the job. She never expected anything else. Still, there was a hollow space where something had quietly begun to grow. "People like me don't belong in his world," she thought. "I knew that. I should have known better." And so she slipped back into her old routine. Long nights, early mornings, budgeting down to the last dollar. Her walls had always been strong. She knew how to survive. But Emmy noticed. That evening, the little girl sat on the floor, coloring quietly. Her drawings were less colorful now. The stick figures looked smaller, their smiles faint. She looked up at her mother, holding up a new picture. A plain one this time. No rainbows, no stars. Just a man standing alone by a window. "Mommy," she asked softly, "did I break Mr. Stephen?" Kathy's heart twisted. She dropped to her knees, pulling Emmy into her lap. "No, baby," she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "You didn't break him." She held her a little tighter, pressing her cheek against Emmy's. But sometimes, grown-ups break themselves, and no one knows how to fix them. She didn't cry. Not in front of her daughter. But something inside her trembled, a quiet, unspoken grief for something that had barely begun before it was gone. The wind howled outside the thin windows of the small apartment, slipping through unseen cracks. Inside, the room was dim but calm, lit by a single warm yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling like a tired star. The apartment was no more than 25 square meters, just enough for a mattress, a wobbly table, and a second-hand heater that groaned more than it warmed. But it was clean, tidy, held together by quiet strength and quiet love. Kathy sat cross-legged on the floor, sewing an old sweater with steady hands. The wool was thinning, but she was determined to make it last another winter. Beside her, Emmy lay on her stomach, coloring with worn crayons. Usually she hummed while drawing. Tonight, she was silent. Kathy looked up. "Sweetheart?" she asked gently. "You okay?" Emmy didn't answer at first. She stared out the window at the blinking traffic light down the street. "Do you miss Mr. Stephen?" Kathy asked softly. Emmy gave a small nod. After a pause she whispered, "Maybe he's sad, so he had to go fix himself." Kathy froze mid-stitch. The needle stopped in her hand. She blinked, unsure whether to smile or cry. Her daughter, not yet 4, somehow always knew what to say, gentle truths wrapped in tiny words. Later that night, Emmy took out the largest sheet of paper she had. It was from last winter, the last of her special paper that Kathy had bought when they could still afford extras. She smoothed it out and began to draw. She drew their small room, the heater, the table, her mother sewing, herself with crayons. Then she added one more figure, a tall man with dark hair, sitting cross-legged beside them, Mr. Stephen. She added a heart above his head. Then, on the wall, in uneven letters, she wrote, "You can come here. We don't have much, but we have hugs." When she finished, she rolled the drawing and brought it to her mother. "Can you give it to him?" Emmy asked. "So he knows he can come if he wants." Kathy stared at the paper. Heart caught somewhere between fear and hope. Part of her wanted to explain that people like Stephen lived in different worlds, that kind gestures didn't always mean lasting presence, that not everyone came back just because you wished they would. But Emmy's eyes were so full of light, Kathy couldn't dim that. The next day, while Emmy napped, Kathy folded the drawing, placed it in a plain envelope, and left it at the front desk of Stephen's building. No return address, just Mr. Langston. Across the city, Stephen sat alone in his penthouse, Scrolling through unfinished emails, his mind scattered. Ever since he pulled away, something hadn't felt right. He had done it before, closed off, stepped back, but this time, the silence didn't bring him peace. It brought absence. He thought of Emmy's laughter, Kathy's calm presence, the way the house had felt, warmer. When the housekeeper handed him the envelope that evening, he almost set it aside. But something, some pull, made him open it. It was a drawing. He unfolded it slowly. There it was. A room he had never been in, but knew instantly. Emmy, Kathy, and himself. Together. A little family drawn in crayon. And those words, "You can come here. We don't have much, but we have hugs." Stephen stared at it for a long time. Then quietly, he said to himself, This is what a home looks like." He didn't think. He didn't ask a driver. He grabbed a pen and scribbled a note. "I'd like to come over, if the hugs are still available." With the drawing in hand, Stephen Langston walked out into the winter night, not toward a boardroom, but something far more unfamiliar, toward warmth, toward a second chance. That night, in the tiny apartment, the doorbell rang. Kathy opened it, and there he stood. No suit, no driver, no distance in his eyes, just a man holding a child's drawing, and, for the first time in a long time, letting someone in. The knock was soft, barely louder than the wind rattling the window pane. Kathy opened the door slowly, expecting perhaps a neighbor, or maybe the landlord with another reminder about the heater. Instead, she froze. Stephen stood there, not in a pressed suit, not with a briefcase or an assistant trailing behind, just a man in a simple navy sweater, jeans, and a soft, unsure expression. In his hands was the drawing Emmy had made, the paper slightly crinkled from being held too tightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emmy darted from inside, her voice rising with joy. "Mr. Stephen? You came." Stephen bent down to her level, meeting her bright eyes. "I came for this," he said, holding out the picture gently. "For you." Emmy beamed and threw her arms around his neck without hesitation. Kathy stood there, heart racing, unsure whether to invite him in or stop time altogether. "May I come in?" Stephen asked quietly, eyes now on Kathy. She nodded, stepping aside. The apartment was small, worn with years of use and modest living. The furniture was mismatched but well kept. A loaf of bread sat cooling on the counter, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something warm. Kathy always baked something simple for Emmy on cold nights. It made the place feel less temporary. Stephen stepped inside, his shoes making soft sounds against the linoleum. He sat down on a wooden chair that creaked under his weight, but he didn't flinch. He glanced around, not in judgment, but with something like curiosity, like gratitude. Kathy moved quietly to the kitchenette and poured him a cup of hot tea. She handed it to him, and he took it with both hands, as though it were something precious. He looked down, then up at her, and spoke. "I'm sorry, Kathy, for pulling away like I did." He paused, searching for the right words. "I've spent so many years controlling everything, my time, my work, my feelings, and then you and Emmy came along, and suddenly I couldn't control anything, especially how I felt." Kathy lowered her eyes, voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared too. You're the first person who's made me feel hopeful in a long time, and that hope made me feel fragile, like it could all slip away the moment I reached for it." Stephen reached across the table and gently took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull back. In the quiet that followed, Emmy crawled into her mother's lap, resting her head against Kathy's shoulder. Her small voice filled the room like a light. "Maybe we can just be a team. No need to be perfect." The simplicity of her words broke whatever barriers were left. Stephen chuckled softly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, spiral-bound calendar. "I wasn't sure how to say this," he said, handing it to Kathy and Emmy. "So I made a plan. That's what I do best. Inside the calendar were notes scribbled in Stephen's neat handwriting. Park day. Just us three. Saturday, library reading time with Emmy. Sunday, pancakes, even if they burn. December 17, build a gingerbread house. Page after page, a timeline of intention, of effort, of wanting to belong. I don't know how to be a father, Stephen said quietly, but I know how to show up, and I want to be a part of your lives, if you'll have me. Kathy didn't answer with words. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and the warmth that filled the tiny room had nothing to do with the heater. Across the table, Emmy lay curled up on the couch, hugging the wooden doll Stephen had helped her fix. She watched them for a moment, then whispered into the quiet, "She's not broken anymore. And maybe we're not either." Stephen closed his eyes for a second, holding on to the peace in that moment. No boardrooms, no contracts, just the beginning of something real. A year had passed. The penthouse was no longer home. Neither was the tiny apartment with creaky chairs and yellow bulbs. Now, a cozy two-bedroom house in the quiet suburbs was where they belonged. The front yard had a white fence and a crooked mailbox with a hand-painted sign. The Langstons. Kathy painted it. Emmy added hearts in the corners. Inside, the house glowed with soft Christmas light. Kathy stood by the modest tree, placing ornaments carefully. Her blonde hair was loose, catching the lights like golden threads. She wore a red sweater, sleeves rolled up, and hummed while working. Emmy twirled in circles, trailing paper garlands behind her. "Mommy, I made one with extra glitter," she shouted, holding up a snowflake. Kathy smiled. "It's perfect, just like you." In the kitchen, something sizzled. The smell of roasted garlic filled the air. Stephen stood at the oven in a too-large apron that read, "King of the Kitchen." He checked the roast chicken with exaggerated focus. "If this one's dry like last time, I'm officially banned from poultry," he muttered. "You say that every week," Kathy teased. "I mean it every time," he said, smiling. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad. Emmy had helped, mostly by sneaking croutons and stealing dressing. They ate at their small wooden table, laughter echoing around them. On the wall above hung Emmy's first drawing, framed, "You can come here. We don't have much, but we have hugs," Emmy had insisted. "So we never forget," she'd said. After dessert, slightly burned cookies and cocoa with too many marshmallows, Stephen stood and cleared his throat. "I have something," he said, pulling out a small box and handing it to Emmy. She opened it carefully. Inside was a leather photo book. On the cover, "Our first year together." Her eyes lit up. Inside were pictures, Stephen pushing her on swings until his arms gave out. Library visits where Emmy read aloud. Pancake Sunday, burnt but full of laughter. Moving day, boxes everywhere, but joy on every face. Kathy flipped through beside her, eyes glistening. Stephen looked at Kathy. "Come with me?" he asked. She nodded, and they stepped onto the porch. Snow had begun to fall, slow, soft, silent. They stood quietly, taking in the stillness. Then Stephen reached for her hand. "I used to think love was the biggest risk," he said. "But now, not being with you? That's what I'm afraid of." From his coat, he pulled out a small silver ring, simple, no diamonds. Inside, it read, "Fixed by love." Kathy looked up, overcome. She nodded, eyes full. Stephen slipped the ring on her finger and held her close. Then the door burst open. "Does this mean I get to be the flower girl?" Emmy shouted, barefoot, arms raised. They laughed. Stephen scooped her up with one arm and wrapped the other around Kathy. Inside, lights twinkled. Outside, snow kept falling. As the camera pulled back, through a frosted window, the image froze. 3 figures in a quiet embrace, warm and whole. The narrator's voice faded in. "Someone once said that broken things can be fixed, and sometimes it's the cracks that make a home truly complete." If this story touched your heart, just like it touched ours, don't forget to give it a hype and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional, healing, and unforgettable tales like this one. Every week, we bring you real warmth, love, and stories that stay with you.